Hello everyone, I want to show you guys this halberd that I made, socketed with the protective langets. Okay, and I want to spend some time today talking about these protective langets on this halberd and how they are different from the ones on the poleaxe. Okay, so I looked at a lot of original museum pieces, and they seem to come in somewhere around 88 inches. Somewhere in the area of maybe somewhere between 5 pounds to 5.5 pounds. The one of the things that I've seen repetitively is that the blade is thin. Okay, so on the historical ones, the blade's thin, and it needs to be, right, because this thing is 88 inches long, right? So the way George Silver described it, if you raise your arm, the proper height is that it comes up to your arm. That head needs to be light so that you can hold this from the end, swing it, and recover, right? And you can work that spear point, you know, extend, recover, hook with it. So with the halberd, the cutting edge is kind of like because when you look at this, you see like this cutting edge and like, oh wow, it's a massive chopper. This is more of a spear with hooks. Okay, the hooks are what I think is more important, right? Because especially in the context that this was designed for common people to defeat knights. They needed to be cheap. You needed to be able to mass produce them, so that lots of cheaply armed people like Langets could outnumber the knights and defeat them. And what they did is they would hook them off the horses, right? You would have like 5, 6 guys hook them off the horses, and once they're on the ground, you basically put the point into an opening in the armor to kill them. Okay, so that's how this would have been used directly against knights in pike formations. This is a support weapon where now you're using, the hooks to basically pin opposing pikes, which are basically long, like 15 to 20 foot spears. Use this to trap the pikes to the ground to create an opening for one of your guys with a pike to stab the other guy. Okay, so in the line formation, this is a support weapon. It's also really handy if somebody decides to, because if you've got like 2 lines facing off where everybody's got like 15 to 20 foot pikes, the obvious weakness there is if you get, inside the tip of those pikes. Okay, like how do you deal with that person, right? So you needed to have some shorter weapons inside of the formation to be able to deal with anybody that tried to get close. Okay, so the halberd and the Zulhanders, right? Like, and just in general, swords were really good for dealing with people that tried to close when you had 2 lines of pikes that were facing off. Okay, so in this video, I want to talk about these langets because this is I did do another one with langets, but this one didn't have the fully enclosed head, right? So with this one, this is kind of like a poleaxe design, right? Because the way this is designed, basically the top spike comes down, but it splits, and the legs come around the head, and this is forge welded in place. With the poleaxe, you run a rivet through it. With the halberds, you generally forge weld it together. So what you do is you get the metal really hot. So at a certain temp, you bring it up to a temperature where it's almost melting, but not quite melting, and then the 2 kind of bond together. Okay, so that's how this is built. So with this one, the shaft comes up and it stops right here, whereas the other ones, they're enclosed, or they're socketed rather, because this one over here is not enclosed. So the same deal here, right? See, this one actually, the shaft goes up inside the head, comes up to about there, but and then this comes down. But with this one, I did not enclose them. And when I look at historical pictures, sometimes they wrap around, sometimes they don't. And just doing some practice, impact testing, it's clear to see that, hey, listen, if you enclose these just a little bit, you take some of the stress off of the rivets, and more importantly, you take some of the stress off of the wood. So with this one over here, when this hits over here, this obviously wants to come back a little bit. So what's going to happen is the rivets are going to stress out the wood a little bit. And what that can do is that can start splitting your wood. So what I do is you try to make them a little bit longer so that you spread that stress out throughout the shaft instead of concentrating it on a smaller area up here. Okay, so you can improve upon that, right? Take a little bit of stress off. If you have the shaft insert and socket into the head a little bit, right? It comes up to about there. So now when this impacts, there's a little bit less stress that the rivets place on the wood, right? And then we can take this a step further by wrapping these around a little bit, like I did on this one. So if you look on this one over here, you see how I wrapped it around. So now when this impacts, okay, not only is this socketed where it comes up, into the head a little bit, but because it also wraps around, it further reduces the stress on the wood, right? And it's less likely that the rivets are going to split the wood. So now most of the time, right, this thing is doing more, spear work, hooking, pushing, pulling, but occasionally it's going to chop. Okay, occasionally it's going to chop. So what happens when this thing is chopping is occasionally the wood is going to hit stuff. Okay, and the naked wood is the most vulnerable part of this. And we have plenty of images of halberds breaking. Okay, so the wood does break. In fact, most of I know with the poleaxes, like, because I had actually wrote to, I guess, one of the curators in the Royal Armories Museum, and they said they had 16 poleaxes, and none of them had the original shafts on them. Okay, so at some point they had broken and they had been replaced. Okay, so the shaft is a place of vulnerability. So a way to protect that is to put these langets on it. So this protects it a little bit better. All right, this is on all four sides. But the issue is now we're adding weights. Okay, so this one here, even though this head is slightly smaller, right? If you compare this to the other heads that I made, that head, I made it a little bit smaller because I knew that I was going to be adding a little extra weight here. So I tried to remove some of the weight from up there. So this still comes in heavier at 5 pounds, 10 ounces. Okay, so the others average about 5 pounds, 2 ounces. So because of these langets over here, this came in 5 pounds, 10 ounces. The langets by themselves weighed 10 ounces. Okay, so they added 10 ounces to this weapon. So because I took some of the weight, a little bit of weight off of the head, I'm still able to hold this from the end and and control it, swing and recover. But I'm gonna say that when I hold this one, which even has a slightly larger head, but because I don't have that extra 10 ounces over here on the side, this one is definitely more nimble. Okay, so one of the things that I've been trying to figure out is, are these protective langets worth it on the halberd? Okay, because the weight's definitely there. If you guys have been watching my channel over the years, you guys know that I actually do armored combat. So I am very sensitive to how fast and how nimble the weapon is, you know, and I have a very good sensor. So I can actually feel this extra weight there, and I can see how that would slow me down. So in my personal opinion, right, if I was going into combat, okay, I would not take this halberd with the protective langets, okay, unless I knew that, you know, it had to be something that needed to last a lot longer. The thing with combat is, you know, most of the time you're more concerned with like surviving the next day, not surviving a couple of months down the road. So if I was going into combat, I would definitely take the one without the protective langets. Especially if I knew that my job was going to be mostly, you know, hooking and stabbing and pulling, and trying to control opposing pikes, I would go with a slightly lighter one, okay? Because it's just going to be a lot more effective, and it might actually increase your chance of surviving the battle, okay? So that's one of those things that like I really wouldn't have known unless I had actually built them, right? That's why I built like 4 of these, 5 if you include the prototype. So with the prototype, I actually went a little bit thinner on the metal, and the problem with that is that when I went a little bit thinner, I mean, it's fully functional and it's probably good enough, okay, but I can definitely see like a lot of the forging lines, and I can see the rivets where, because I had to basically connect this temporarily with rivets so that I could create the pressure to forge weld it, so I could see that in the metal. Now with historical wrought iron, that tends to stick a little bit better, and you tend to lose the metal is less likely to burn off in the heat. Modern metal, when you heat it up, it turns to burn away. So I have to start with a thicker metal, so as it burns away, I still have enough material left over. So with this one, I started off a little bit thinner, but then as it burned away, it got to a point where I had to stop because it was going to end up being too thin. So I had to start a little bit thicker so that by the time I was done, I still had enough metal there, and I could basically like file it down a little bit and make it look good. Okay, so that's kind of, so today with modern metals, you have to start a little bit thicker so that you end up with enough material to work with. Okay, but like I said, with this, I ended up at the right weight for this length. 5 pounds, 10 ounces on this with the langets. 5 pounds, 10 ounces at 88 inches. On this one over here, and most of these others, I came in at 5 pounds, 2 ounces at about, this one looks like it's a little bit shorter. I think this might be like 86 inches. But again, I'm in that ballpark. So I want to show you poleaxe. Okay, so with the poleaxe, so this is a very different weapon, right? And it doesn't matter if I put an axe on it, a different construction. This is designed so that knights could fight other knights in armored combat. Okay, so whereas the halberd was designed so that common people could defeat knights. Okay, so with this one, because we're doing mostly single combat or fighting other guys in armor, this needed to be a little bit heavier. Hence the hammer, right? So the hammer is very popular, but in addition to that, the langets on this are twice as thick. So whereas those are about 1/16, these are like about 1/8 on each side, and they go all the way to the edge. And I don't need the protection in the front because when this hits, this is hitting with the edge over here. Okay, so this is thick enough that this is a hitting surface. Whereas on those are not a hitting surface because they're gonna easily take a bend and warp. Those are strictly to protect the wood. This protects the wood, but it's primarily for hitting people with this, hitting with this, mostly hooking with this, because if you hit armor with this, it's going to want to glance, and then ultimately we're hitting percussively so that we can create an opportunity to drive the spike into a gap. Okay, so with this one here, it tends to be about the height of a man, about 6 foot. whereas the halberd tends to be about like 7'4" to somewhere between 7'7" and a 7.5 foot. They tend to come into that area. So now, interestingly, as far as the chopping, right? So as you know, the interesting thing here is like this again is primarily a spear with hooks attached to it that also has a chopping ability. Okay. Interestingly enough, from here, like at some point these start falling out of favor on the battlefield, even though they're still used ceremoniously. It seems like the bardiche lasted the longest on the battlefield, like into the 18th century, being used by Russians and other Eastern Europeans. So this is primarily a chopper, but also has that that thrusting ability. And the cool thing about this is a shorter version of this, right, just a little bit shorter, was also used as a musket rest. Okay, so this was used as a musket rest for matchlock muskets. So this was like one of the last pole arms to survive on the battlefield into the 18th century. Okay, so eventually they did go back to the chopper, you know, with a point. Okay, but interesting how that kind of came around. Now, if we look at some of the images of the earlier halberds, because they had halberds like in the 14th century, they're mostly they look like mostly like they're choppers, and the spikes are much shorter. Okay. So the halberds do start off, based on what I can see, uh, more as choppers, and then once we get into 15th, 16th century, we start seeing less and less poleaxes. We start seeing more and more halberds, emphasizing the long spike and the hooks, and eventually we come back to the choppers in the form of the bardiche. So, some interesting info, you guys. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll talk to you soon.